So this is chapter 5, number 8, part 3, or C, however you want to call this. So we figure out of the first number if it's an odd or an even. We set it to a counter. We gotta have a counter up here. And you're going to read in the counter, and you're going to figure out if it's going to be counting starting with an odd or an even number with it. If you divide by mod with 2 and it does equal to 0, you're going to add a 1 to it. If you don't, you're going to take that, which is already an odd number, that first number is going to start with the counter with it. Now, when you come down here, when you look at this while loop that we're about to do, you're going to do a while loop. And in this while loop that you have, you're going to what are you going to test in here? Something has to be tested in here. You realize that. And inside this while loop, here's 3 things about this while loop that you have to realize. Every while loop has 3 things I want to point out here. You gotta have some sort of initialization with this thing. Okay, in this case, this loop right here serves as initialization. Part 2 is you have to test some sort of expression, some sort of Boolean test that you have to test in here. Part 3 is inside this loop, you gotta update the loop. Okay, 3 key essential parts of this: initialization, test, and update. Let's take a look at this part right here. You did the update, you did the initialization of the counter already, right? So obviously we have to compare what counter is going to have to be less than or equal to what number. You read in 2 numbers up here. Your second number is this one right here. Okay, so you come in here, you're going to test that counter less than or equal to num2. Okay, what happens that you want to do this thing? Well, you want to output the memory of the counter, right? So you need to output the memory inside the counter. How do you output that? Well, I'll let you figure that out. Okay, so whatever the memory is, you do a cout of this memory right here. And then you have to actually update your counter. Now, when you look at your counter, I want you to make sure you understand. You update this counter. If you look at this counter, how do you update this counter? Well, updating this counter, you're going to count by odd numbers. This is all the odds in here. All right. So you're updating it. So you're counting it between 1, 3, 5, 7. How do I get from 1 to 3? I have to add 2. How do I get from 3 to 5? I have to add 2. So updating this counter requires you to add a value to that. So inside of this thing, you have to do what? Counter equals counter plus 2. Okay, so that will move you from 1, 3, 5. If it starts on a 3, then it's going to add 2 to it. It's going to add, so on, so on. This is what's going to actually get this loop to be false here. All right. So make sure you have that in here with it as well. So inside of this, you're going to update this thing and do a cout of your counter here. Okay. So when you do a cout in this one, make sure you also have a space between it, between the numbers. So it's going to come down here. In my case, I'm going to put in what 1. It's going to actually compare that with the second number is 10. It's going to loop through this. It's going to count 1 plus 2 is 3, 5, 7, 9, and then it becomes counter becomes 11, and second number is 10. It's going to be false. Exits out this entire loop. Okay. Here's what I want you to do. Make sure you do this for me. If you could for me. If you could, just do this. Begin of every part of this part B and C. If you could. I mean, it would help out tremendously if you can just do a cout on top of this thing. And if you can cout something like a string like this. So I know when I grade part B okay here. Okay, so this will let me know that you are working on part B in here, or starts here. Okay, something like. Okay, that's one way. Let's do. If I did, I'm going to take snag this thing. That's part B. Come down here. I'm going to do part C, and part B, C starts here. Okay, I'm checking my time here. In part C, in your problem, it says output the sum of all the even numbers between your first number and second number. So part C, you're going to output all the sum of this. So let's pick a number. I'm thinking out loud here. So let's say, for example, you put between your first number and your second number. Again, number is 1, second number is 10. So you got to take numbers from what? All the sum of all the even numbers requires what? 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8 plus what else? Okay, so that's all the even number in between, right? So 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus all that. So you got what? 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 plus 6 is 12. 12 plus 8 is 20. Okay, so this should equal. This should output as 20. All right. Now, take a look at this thing. When you look at this, I'm going to take this out. It's just going to cause an error in the code. So I just want to explain what part C is trying to tell you to do. It's pretty much the same thing, is that you have to initialize your structure in this thing. But what is different? What is different? You got to take that first number again, right? You got to take that first number again. And this first number, you come down here. You do this first number. First number divided this. In this case, what you're going to do is you're going to take the first number. If it is an even, you're going to assign it, the first number, to the counter. There's a difference here. If it's an odd, meaning if there is a remainder, you're going to add a 1 to it. Okay? So you're going to actually look at the even number in this time, and you're going to actually change that to something else. So if you look at something like this, so you got to do, this is considered as your initialization of your counter, basically. And inside of this thing, you still have your while loop. It's very similar to this right here. I'm going to snag this one, part B. I'm going to edit this thing down here. You're still going to test this thing, but the body of this thing is going to look a little different, right? Now you realize there's a couple of things here we need to look at. You need to add the counter, whatever the current counter is. If it's an even number or if it's an odd number, we need to add the counter with it to the sum of even, right? Or to something that is the sum starts out with is what? 0, right? So the sum of all the numbers to start out with, we don't have anything. So you need to come up here right now and you need to declare your sum. So I'm just going to call sum of even on top here. I want to initialize it to 0. Anytime when you're asked to add up a number or a sum of a number, to increment, to accumulate, you have to initialize it to a base number with it. So down here with this thing, I need to come down and look at, I want to take the sum of the even, which is 0 right now, right? I need to add it with whatever it's inside the counter. So if the counter is, if the first number happens to be an odd number in my case, I gave it a 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. Now it becomes counter. Counter is 2. 2 plus the sum of the even is 0. That now equals to, I update the sum of the even. Okay, so that updates it. Okay, so that updates the sum of the even. Now I need to what? Update my counter. I still have to have my counter. This is the loop control variable in this thing. So inside of this, I need to do counter plus 2 because I'm going to do the add. 2 is this becomes the even number in this thing, so this updated as the counter. Let me check the time.